Hello, my most amazing artists. Today we're meeting the artist James Rizzi. This is some of James Rizzi's artwork. He is a New York artist. He lives in New York City and he loves New York City, which is probably why he draws and paints so many cities. Today we're going to be drawing our very own silly cities with lots of faces on those buildings. As you can see, James Rizzi always puts silly faces on his buildings. Today we're focusing on the front of our picture, which is called the foreground. It's what comes before the background. It's called the foreground. What's in the front of the picture? And in the front of this picture is our silly cities and those city buildings. In the background, we will be putting our Starry Night paintings that we worked on last week. Now, today we're working on a separate piece of paper. That separate piece of paper should be held the same way as your Starry Night painting, because eventually we will cut out our cities and glue them onto our Starry Night background. So today we're focusing on the foreground. Don't worry about what's behind it, knowing that we're going to put our Van Gogh Starry Nights behind our city buildings. Let's get started, shall we? On your piece of paper, you're going to write your name and class code on the back. After that, flip it over and make sure you're holding your paper the same way as your Starry Night painting, either horizontally, which is long ways, or vertically, which is tall. I'm going to start out by drawing some rectangles. These rectangles should be different sizes and heights. Some can be tall, some can be short. I do not want to take up my whole paper, otherwise I won't have room for my Starry Night background. Keep in mind that you don't want to draw any buildings too tiny or too skinny, or you won't have any room for those silly faces and all the awesome details that we'll add to them. If you need help making some rectangles, I will have rulers available, but just do your best to draw them on your own. I'm going to start out by making some of those silly faces that James Rizzi is known for putting on his buildings. These buildings have all different shapes on them for their eyes, their mouths, and their noses. I'm going to add some windows and doors, which might also be part of the building. I'm going to add some other things on top, like maybe some different rectangles, maybe a flag. I could add different silly things, like maybe a hat on a building. It's up to you. It doesn't have to be a realistic city. This is a silly city, but just make sure that you're drawing everything pretty big. No teeny tiny buildings. They should be almost as big as mine. I could make some buildings into things I like maybe a cat. I could make another building into myself. I could make a building into SpongeBob if I wanted to, or a character from a game. It's up to you, but just make sure you're using different shapes to draw those parts of the building. You could make different shape eyes, you could use rectangles, you could use squares, triangles, diamonds, whatever you want to make those different shapes for the mouth or the eyes or the nose. Some buildings might have teeth, some might have no mouth. It's up to you what you do on your city. Please make sure that you're using pencil to start with today, because you only get one piece of paper. If you make a mistake, you can always erase, but I would suggest just moving forward, and you can always erase after we outline everything in Sharpie marker. So I'm drawing all of my details first and all of my silly faces on my buildings, and then I'm going to go ahead and carefully outline all of my pencil lines with Sharpie marker. And then I'll go back and erase the pencil lines and any mistakes that I made. But I'm just moving forward right through those mistakes and turning them into happy accidents for now. Then I'm going to take that Sharpie marker and carefully trace over all of my pencil lines. I am not using my Sharpie to color anything in today. We will have colored markers for that. Sharpies are only to outline your pencil lines to make them stand out. So after I outline all of my pencil lines and I make sure I get every little window, every door, every eyeball, every doorknob, whatever it is that I am outlining, then I can start to think about erasing my pencil lines just to clean up my page a little bit. So after I get everything outlined, I'm going to take an eraser. There are large erasers in your bin that might make it a little bit faster and easier to erase. So right now, I just have a tiny eraser on the end of my pencil, but I'm always making a letter L with my hand and erasing in the safety zone of that L. See what happens when I move my pencil outside of that L. it will crinkle. So the paper might even tear if I'm erasing too hard. Always keep your eraser in the safety zone of your L. Every time I erase, I'm working in that L. After I get my paper cleaned up, everything's outlined, all my pencil lines are erased, then I am ready to color with marker. Notice that when I'm coloring with my markers, I always open the cap and then I recap it right after I'm done. Now, another trick to coloring with markers that especially will be helpful with all of these details is outlining the inside of what you want to color. So notice I made an outline along the inside of my building, and then I don't have to worry about coloring outside the lines or over top of any of those important details that I wanted to be another color so that they stand out. So I outline around those things, and then I don't have to worry about bumping into them. So all I have to do is I just bump right into those same colors. And that way I make sure that all of my coloring is inside of my own lines. So notice I'm going to do that same trick. I'm going to color in all of my details with my lighter color marker first. I'm using my yellow because if I go back and use my yellow after, it might get a little bit mixed with my darker colors, and that will not be good for the marker. These markers are brand new, and I hope to keep them that way for all the other classes to use. So here I go outlining what I want to color, and then I can easily color inside of those lines. But when I do this marker trick of outlining and then coloring, it really helps a lot and helps move me along faster and have nice thick coloring instead of thin and wimpy. Also make sure that whenever you're using your marker, you are holding that marker on its side. Notice I'm not pushing down on the tip of the marker. I'm holding the marker on its side and getting a nice thick and juicy line. Not thin and wimpy. I'm coloring in thick and thirsty instead of thin and wimpy, and that's because I'm coloring on the side of my marker. If you happen to get some marker on the sides of your hands, well, that's okay. Just keep in mind where you're putting your hand. If you're smearing your hand through your wet paper and that marker that hasn't dried yet, you might get your marker on your hands, and that's okay. We don't need to wash them. You could just use the art wipes in your bin to wipe off your hands when you're done. Also make sure that your name and class code are on your Silly Cities before you put it away in your table folder. Make sure all your markers have their caps on tight, get back into your bin, and that you clean up. All right, artists, have fun making your James Rizzi inspired Silly Cities.